Hello and welcome to the Zebra Technologies DevTalk webinar. My name is Dan Qualiana, Head of Developer Relations at Zebra Technologies, and today's webinar is Building Ionic Applications for Zebra Devices. This is a joint presentation from the Zebra team, so Darren Campbell, one of our software architects, will be co-presenting with Justin Willis, who's Developer Relations at Ionic, and we also have Andrew Hare, who's the Head of Marketing at Ionic. Before we dive into anything, I did want to give a little bit of overview on some of these webinars. If you are interested in learning more on Zebra, you can head to developer.zebra.com. We will be sending out an email with a link to the slides and a recording of the presentation, but you can also find that at that developer portal I mentioned, developer.zebra.com, in the events section. If you do have any questions throughout the webinar today, please type that into the question box and we will work on addressing those at the end of the conference. So again, thank you for joining. And before we kick things off, I did want to give a little overview on Zebra Technologies and who we are. So Zebra Technologies is a solutions-based company that creates enterprise devices for the rugged sector. So we primarily have Android mobile computers. They're smartphones and that have scanning capabilities built in. We do barcode scanners, RFID readers, barcode printers, and encoders. So we are doing this presentation because we've had a number of large enterprise customers that reached out to both Zebra and to Ionic, who are using the Ionic framework to build their applications to run on Zebra devices. So Zebra is often not a household name, even though we are used by a large number of businesses, and that's more, we're often found in the back of a business. So different use cases that you may see us used in would be if you receive a package delivered to your door, if you go into a hospital and you have a wristband on and you see a nurse or a practitioner scanning your wristband and checking things. And also in a retail store, you'll see store associates using Zebra devices. They would be doing inventory, they would be doing price checking, different things along those lines. So, you know, as it said on the last slide, we are used 95% of the Fortune 500. And you have seen our products in use, but often they're kind of behind the scenes. So hopefully as we go through this, if you are interested in building an app to work with a Zebra device, you will be able to understand how best to do that. So with that being said, I'd like to welcome Andrew and say, Andrew, thanks a lot for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Thank you for having us, and thanks to everyone who joined us today. I'm just going to speak really briefly about Ionic, and then I'm going to turn it over to the rest of the team. Justin from our team will be diving in much deeper, but essentially Ionic is an app development platform that makes it easy for you to build apps for multiple platforms, so iOS, Android, progressive web apps, with one code base using basic web development skills, so HTML, Java, CSS. So if you know how to build a basic web app, you can build mobile and progressive web apps with Ionic. I think what really makes Ionic unique is that we're a very developer-focused company. So we are a company by developers for developers, and we're backed by a very large community. There are over 350,000 active developers building apps every single day with Ionic, and a majority of the Fortune 500 are using Ionic today. So we're thrilled to be here, and hopefully you all enjoy the presentation. And again, Justin and Darren will be going in much more detail, but do appreciate your time today.
Okay, thank you. So thanks, Dan. Thanks, Andrew. My name is Darren Campbell, one of the software architects here at Zebra Technologies. So I'm going to take you through in this presentation. I know we've probably got a lot of different skill sets on the call. Some people will be very familiar with Ionic, but unsure about Zebra, and some people the exact opposite, our regular joiners who come to every Zebra Dev Talk and they're kind of thinking, well, what on earth is this Ionic? So hopefully there'll be something for everyone in this presentation, and we'll take you from 0 to 100, and by the end of it, you should see how you would be able to integrate scanning capabilities into an Ionic application. first thing to really understand if you're sort of coming onto the Zebra developer portal is, where do I start? There's lots of different software development kits available for development for Zebra devices, and which one works best for Ionic. On the left, we have an enterprise mobility development kit. This is the native SDK. If you're writing an Android, or we also have a Xamarin variant of it, that allows you to have like low-level interface into the scanner hardware, essentially, and you can code your application. It makes it very performant, gives you the most amount of control, but in order to use this SDK, you would have to like maintain the scanner state. So there's a whole state machine in the scanner. You need to have knowledge of that. You need to like handle all of your threads, because things are coming back to you on different threads, and et cetera, et cetera. So it would be possible to wrap this SDK into a plugin, and I've actually done that for customers in the past. It's like on my GitHub, it's up there, but we're not recommending that as a way forward in this presentation. In the middle, enterprise browser, you might see, hybrid development. That kind of fits in with Ionic. It's an entity unto itself, enterprise browser. What it is a standalone application which wraps a web view and exposes a JavaScript API to an application written in HTML or JavaScript. So it's not like, you remember Crosswalk back in the day. You could incorporate Crosswalk as an alternative browser in a number of these frameworks. It doesn't work like that, so it doesn't really play with Ionic or cross-platform frameworks in that way. Data Wedge is the way forward, certainly for this presentation. It's the way I would recommend you integrate with Ionic. Data Wedge is a system service resident on every single one of Zebra's Android mobile computers, and it really, everything I said that you needed to do yourself with the EMDK, the scanner state, the threading, etc., Data Wedge takes care of all of that for you. So all you have to do is to define in Data Wedge a set of properties. We'll go through that in a future slide, actually, and you can send commands to Data Wedge. You can receive any kind of barcode data that you scan just very easily in your application through an intent API. So I wanted to front load this presentation with something, something most interesting before we go back to basics and we sort of take it from 0 to 100 and build up. So this is a sample application that I put together. I'll put my hands up. I'm not a JavaScript developer or a TypeScript developer or an Ionic developer. I really came at this sort of wide-eyed and wanting to learn. And so it didn't take me more than a couple of days to put this together. I think it's a really responsive application. I developed quickly. I think it's visually appealing. I'm not very good at making things visually appealing, so I think I've succeeded here. But it's an application running on a Zebra device, and it just demonstrates how you would control scanning through Data Wedge, and it also uses a third-party intent. I've just got a short video I'm going to show on the presentation here. This is running on one of our TC51 devices. It's one of the newer devices, and it's called the Zebra Ionic Demo. The code is available on GitHub. Some people on this call probably have already seen it, because I've seen at least one issue raised, and we managed to get that addressed before the call. So thank you if you're listening, whoever raised that issue. And so this is the application running. So a couple of things to note first out of the box. So Data Wedge will have a version number. Just bear this in mind. On the newest devices, you won't have to do any kind of configuration if it's version 6.5 or higher. You'll get messages if your version of Data Wedge is a little bit older, but the application will gracefully degrade the functionality available to you if your Data Wedge version is lower than the functionality supports. But this is running on a NuGet device. I'll just let the video play out here. The profile will be more evident when we go into Data Wedge later on. So what I'm doing at the moment, I'm scanning using the hardware trigger on the device. You could also use this soft scan and floating action button, and the data is being received very quickly and populating the UI, and everything appears smoothly. Just to make the demo a little bit more interesting, I can't stop scanning, obviously I enjoy it. There's also a ability to select another scanner. So rather than use the hardware laser imager, I can choose the camera scanner. This is all just using the data wedge API. And now when I scan, these scans are coming through as a, so I'm using the camera, sorry, to scan. It's very, very quick and easy. The scans are also appearing in this list below here. I have the ability to disable the decoders. So these were EN13 barcodes that I was trying to decode. And you see there, I've given up because it would not scan because I'd configured the scanner to ignore EN13 decoders. And then when I re-enable, the scan goes through, no problem. So that's just a sample application. Like I say, I put together very quickly just to show what's possible to achieve with Ionic plus Data Wedge plus the third-party plugin. And in a few slides' time, I'll go through these steps to actually add that to an application. But for now, I'm going to hand over to Justin, who's going to take us through what is Ionic and building an Ionic application. I'll just hand over.
Awesome. Quick, Darren, are you going to control the slides, or?
I'm going to make you presenter unless you want me to.
Nope,
do
I'll present.
Okay.
Nope, I can present. Awesome. And that's the right side. All right, so what is Ionic? So I'm Justin. I do developer relations at Ionic. So I'm just going to do a quick dive into what exactly Ionic is. So Ionic, as Andrew already kind of touched on, we're an open source cross-platform UI framework. So when you use Ionic, you build for the web, and because the web runs anywhere, iOS, Android, progressive web apps, Electron, you can run that one app anywhere. So the classic, write once, ship everywhere. So we are built with open web technology, so HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. We currently use Angular as our framework of choice for writing your application code. And you can still access native features on any device, and we'll kind of dive into later how that works. So we have a huge global community. We're one of the top 50 open source projects on GitHub. We're also one of the top TypeScript projects on GitHub. I always like to call that out. I think that's pretty cool. We have about 33,000 stars. I think it's a touch over that now, 35,000 stars. And we have around 5 million developers in 200 plus countries. So that's pretty much every country in the world. And we also have some professional tools and services too. So we have Ionic Pro that offers some really cool testing, monitoring, live updates, services that you can look into. And along with that, obviously, enterprise support and services. So here are some examples of Ionic apps that we like to talk about. So MarketWatch, their app is on the in the Play Store and the App Store. It's a very popular app. Also Nationwide, they also chose to go with Ionic, and their apps are also in the Play Store and App Store. So Ionic's all cool and all that good stuff, but why do you want to develop with Ionic? So as I already said, and Darren kind of alluded to this, Ionic is very quick to build with. So even if you're not like a super skilled JavaScript developer or something like that, one of our focuses is on making things simple. That's actually one of our biggest focuses, and making it easy to build really high quality apps. So like I said, we are built with the web, so that allows you to ship to anywhere that the web runs, all with just one code base. Yeah, we're backed by a real company. Ionic is a real company. We are a developer friendly platform. Like I said, we have a huge open source community. And since we're built with open web tech, we're already familiar to 90% of developers out there. If you've ever built a website, you can pretty much build an Ionic app in just a few days. So building your first Ionic app. You want to go ahead and download and install Ionic. It's a quick npm install command. You'll choose your starters. So we have a few starters. Our base starters are the blank starter, tab starter, and side menu starter. So these give you some like classic kind of navigation setups that people are used to, and gives you a nice base for starting to build your app. Then you'll build your UI, and then you can start adding data functionality using plugins like the Zebra plugin that we're talking about today. So yeah, as I said, we have 3 starters. We have the blank starter, tab starter, and a side menu starter. We also have some community-made starters that kind of dive into deeper things, so like an AWS starter, a super starter that comes set up with some really cool tools. So yeah. Downloading and installing Ionic, as I said, it is just a simple npm command that will install our CLI, and then you just run Ionic start, and that starts you on your Ionic journey. You do need Node and npm installed out of the box. You can go to nodejs.org. Also, if you go to our docs, which is the screenshot's taken from, we have a nice link there to go to nodejs.org and install Node. Build a UI. So one of my favorite features, I am not a designer. I am not good at design at all. So one of the first reasons I came to Ionic was because we have all these cool pre-built UI components. So as you can see, we have iOS and Android device here. This is the same code base, no changes or anything like that, but based on which device it's running on, the app will either look like a classic material design app for Android or an iOS app for iOS devices. Also, because we're just HTML and CSS and JavaScript at the end of the day, you can go in and customize all this to your liking. So as you saw earlier from the Nationwide app, they have a very custom UI that looks, like their brand and feels like a Nationwide app, but it's built with Ionic. Also adding data functionalities, as Darren has been talking about with Zebra. So we currently interface for Cordova. So Cordova is this layer that basically sits in between your web view and the native APIs on your device, and allows you to call into native APIs from a TypeScript API. So this gives you a nice way to access functionality that is not available in the browser yet from your JavaScript application. So you can choose an existing plugin. We have Ionic Native, which is this huge collection of plugins that we think covers 90% of what people want. And if not, you can always build your own, as they have here at Zebra. And this native layer, it's important to realize this exists separate from Ionic. So you don't have to use Cordova or Capacitor, as we'll go into later, with Ionic. But if you're building a native app with Ionic, you're probably going to want to use something like Cordova. So what's under the hood? So as I said, we currently use Angular as our framework of choice. It's just TypeScript, CSS, and HTML at the end of the day. So as you can kind of see from this cool diagram we have here, your code sits, with the front-end framework, which is Angular. That also sits on top of Ionic, which gives you all the nice UI components. Then you have your cross-platform runtime, so Capacitor or Cordova. So this allows you, as I said, to integrate with the data functionality. And then you can ship this to anywhere the web runs. So PWAs are a huge thing that are coming out now. Android, iOS devices, Mac, Windows, and Linux using Electron. And this gives you one code base. You can ship it anywhere, and it looks nice and works nice everywhere the web runs. All right, and I'll go ahead and switch over to Darren here. All right, Darren, you should be good to go.
Thank you, Justin. So hopefully everyone should be seeing my screen now.
Yes.
Yep, brilliant. Okay, thank you very much, Justin. There's one more piece of the puzzle to cover before we can get into writing an end-to-end Ionic app which can capture barcode data, and that's just to go into a little bit of more detail on what data wedge is. So earlier in the presentation, I said it's a service that's running on your device. It's running on every Zebra Android device, and it's been around for about 15 years now. It used to run on the old Windows Mobile CE devices, so it's a very mature product. What you do, you define a profile and you associate the profile with an application or an activity or several applications or several activities, and essentially when that activity is in the foreground, the profile will be in effect. And the profile contains an input. So in this example, the scanner has been the input, but you can also define like a magstripe reader if your device has that, or Simulscan is another technology available from Zebra that can be an input here. But for here, we're just using the scanner. And then you have the output. Again, here we're using intent. So we're sending a broadcast intent in the sample earlier, but it doesn't have to be broadcast. It could be a start activity intent, or the output might just be keystrokes. If you have a an application you're just running in Chrome and you have a text field and you want the scanned data to go into the text field that's in the foreground, then you can do that using the keystroke output. There's also various other outputs. You can also, it's not just input and output. In between that, you can do some modification of the data, so some data formatting. Maybe you only want to pass on the first 5 characters to the output. Maybe you want to do some advanced processing, like send the middle half of the characters. I don't know, but you're able to modify the data before you send it to the output. There, on top of all of this profile logic that I spoke about, you can control data wedge using an intent API. So in the sample available on GitHub that I showed earlier, the profile is all created for you on our newer devices. See the README for more information. So you don't have to even worry about creating the profile. But with this intent API, you can you can clone profiles, you can set various parameters. That was how I was enabling or disabling the decoder so that the barcode scanned or didn't scan when I attempted to. And you don't want to be touching every single one of these devices. You might have like thousands of devices typically in your Zebra deployment. So there are ways to import and export these profiles for mass deployments. So hopefully that's given you like all of the pieces of the puzzle. And the next step is to put those pieces together. And that's the purpose of this next slide. So what we'll be doing, I apologize, everything's labeled 1. I blame PowerPoint for that when we converted from Google Docs. But there is in order for Ionic to understand intents, we need to use a plugin. So we're going to be using this Ionic, this Cordova plugin, sorry, which I'm actually the author of, but it's not released under Zebra. It's released under MIT, so you feel free to take this and use it in your projects. And it's also the underlying implementation of one of the Ionic native plugins that Justin alluded to earlier. But here we'll be accessing the plugin directly. So we need to add that to the project. We need to configure a data wedge profile so that when our application we create comes to the foreground, we need to make sure that data wedge is going to send intent to us, to the correct broadcast address. And then in the application, this third point here, we need to listen for those broadcasts, and we're going to do that using the using the plugin's intent broadcast receiver, and just define this in TypeScript here. What this demo does not show is the optional step of further controlling data wedge with the API, but examples of doing that are in the sample that I showed previously. So I've just got a short video to demonstrate this because honestly, a lot of the time is involved in like just pressing build, and then you have to wait for a couple of minutes whilst it builds. So I'm not going to make everyone wait for that. But I'm starting from nothing, so I'm going to use the starter, the tabs starter that Justin spoke about earlier. And once I've created that, I've sped up some of these running command functions here. And at this point, I will have, Ionic has done its stuff, it's run its build scripts, and now I can just go into the application and deploy it to the device using the Ionic run Android on the device. I'm doing it on the device because I'm doing barcode scanning. There's no emulator for our devices. You can test this and simulate this by mimicking the intents that data wedge would send when it scans a barcode, but that's less interesting to demonstrate. So I'm showing it on a real device here. By deploying it at this point, it also helps us when we configure data wedge later on, because we need to say to data wedge, use this profile when this app is in the foreground, and you need to have the app on the device to do that. Okay, so now next step, add the plugin, the intent plugin to the application. So it doesn't come by default, you just get these 5 plugins by default. Going to add, this is just pulling it out of NPM. So type in all of that. The text was on the previous slide, and then the build scripts will do their thing. It's just pulling it off of NPM. I think it's going to pull in version 100. Just check that it's done that correctly. Yes, here we are. So it's 100. It's called intent shim. We're actually up to version 102 now, but it doesn't matter. It will work with 100. It's all good. Okay, so the next step, I want to configure data wedge. So when I scan a barcode, I want it to send a broadcast intent. So create a profile in data wedge, call it anything. I've called it Ionic here. And I'm going to associate that with the app that I just created in the previous step and deployed. So that's Ionic starter, and that's going to be associated with every activity. Just make sure that I've enabled the scanner, and I'm going to disable keystroke output and enable intent output. So let me just pause it here because it's probably going a little bit fast. So remember, on the previous slide, the profile encapsulates the input, the output, and any formatting you want to do during the process, during the scanning process. So we have scanner for the input, intents for the output, and we're not doing any process in the middle. We're just passing through whatever gets scanned, and we're going to pass that through to our application. And we need to now define the intent properties for the intent that's going to get sent. So we need to make sure that the action we give this intent matches the action we're listening for in our application. There's obviously a number of ways you can do this. You don't have to use broadcast intents, but it's probably simplest to demonstrate here. So that's what we're showing. Okay, so the action, I can call it anything, but as long as it matches what I'm registering for later. So Ionic starter.action seems as good as name as any. Category doesn't really matter, just leave that as the default, and then we're just going to make sure we're sending a broadcast intent. And at that point, we're done in terms of data wedge configuration. Nothing more to do there. The only thing that remains is to modify our Ionic application that we just created to listen for the intent coming in, and to obviously display that intent in the user's interface, just so that we can make sure that this is all working. So like I said earlier, I'm not an Ionic developer, so I apologize if some of this is not best practice. I'm sure a lot of people on this call could probably do a better job of this than me, but here we are. It works, which for many people is probably good enough. So I'm just going to put everything in a text area and set the inner HTML of that text area. I'm going to give that a model. I apologize if that's the wrong terminology, but so I'm using an ion text area. This is where I'm going to put the scanned data, just to prove that what we scanned has been successful. When I was testing this, I noticed that sometimes I would get a callback from the intent, so my broadcast receiver would be triggered. I would try and update the UI, and the UI wouldn't realize that it needed to be updated. So I'm just using this change detector ref on which I can call detects changes whenever I want the user interface to update. So I'm going to call that in my intent broadcast receiver callback. In order to, in fact, I need this variable here. This is the model that's going to control what the inner HTML is of my output. So by default, just scan a barcode, please. I need to keep a reference to this. The reason I'm doing that is because when the broadcast intent comes back, it had a different instance. So this just lets me refer to the actual pages instance on which I will call detects changes later on, just to make it work. And then I just copy and paste the code from the previous slide. I'll just pause and explain what this is doing. So this is calling register broadcast receiver. It's creating a broadcast receiver. It's accessing the intent directly that we imported a couple of minutes ago into our application. Ideally, we would be using the web intent from Ionic Native at this point, but there was a slight bug with that. I have fixed it, and I submitted a pull request yesterday. It's been merged, but I didn't want to start trying to integrate all of that, with a day to go before this presentation. So come back in a month or so, and you'll see the official the official app on the Zebra GitHub will be updated with the official Ionic native library, but for here we're just using the plugin directly, which does work. So action must be the same as we defined earlier in data wedge, and then in the callback we'd log it to the console, obviously just to make sure things are working, but we're going to set that model for the inner HTML, sorry, and then we're going to extract the extras of com symbol data wedge data string. So data string is the string representation of the barcode that's just been scanned. There's also a like you can get a byte array for the scanned data. You can get the type, the decoder type that was scanned, so you can give a lot more information. I show that in the actual demo, but here we're just going to put the barcode data on the page. And then I just have to tell the UI to update itself. And at that point, we're done for this very simple demonstration. I just need to save it and then deploy to the device. Again, I'm testing on a real device. I could have done this on an emulator and sort of mimicked the intent that data wedge sends, but we should be done at this point. This is a TC51 NuGet device. This would, in fact, the code that I've written for here would work on any Zebra device we've released since 2011 that runs Android. And when so scan data here is the default value. I scan a barcode. I did that in the background with the hardware trigger, and the UI gets updated. Obviously, I didn't put it in a list. I could have populated a list and displayed every barcode I'd scanned, but here it's just updating the same UI element. Again, I seem to be scanning multiple barcodes, but that's it in a little over or a little under 6 minutes, just to show from nothing to an Ionic application which can scan barcodes. So hopefully that gives you an idea of the process involved. For any of the resources which I covered here in this presentation, I wrote a blog on like the process I went through to create the sample app available on our GitHub, which was the first video I demoed. The sample app itself, all of the videos in this presentation are on a YouTube playlist. I know when these presentation slides get posted online, they kind of get converted to PowerPoint, so you miss a lot of the actual a lot of the video content. So yeah, they're on YouTube. And to continue developing for Zebra, there's the developer.zebra.com portal address. There's a newsletter. Sign up for that and get notified of any new upcoming dev talks. But as far as I'm concerned, that's it for the simple example. Just going to hand back to Justin now, cover some more advanced Ionic topics. So Justin, I'll hand back to you.
Yep, sounds good. All right, and let me see. Earlier I talked about Cordova, and as you could see from Darren's demo, he was using Cordova to integrate with these native Zebra devices. So we are working on something capacitor. So I mentioned it earlier, it's still an alpha, so it's still really early. Not anything you really need to worry about yet, but it is something that we're working on, and I think it's pretty cool, so I wanted to bring it up here. It is an alternative to Cordova, so we're not trying to replace Cordova or anything like that. If you're happy with Cordova, feel free to keep using Cordova. But this is kind of our in-house alternative to Cordova. So it's a new native bridge, so it enables the same functionality that Cordova enables you to call into native APIs. But the cool thing here is we're PWA focused for capacitor. So Cordova works in PWAs, but in our opinion, it's not the ideal solution. So capacitor is a PWA first kind of take on the native kind of bridge between web views and native devices. So all of the plugins we're making sure that they also work on the web, along with also working on iOS and Android devices. It's MIT open source, just like most of the things we do here at Ionic. Also, most of the things we do here at Ionic, it is designed to be simple out of the box, so it's simple and extensible. And as I said before, it's web native. So that's one of the big differences. Is it's got the focus on PWAs. We're making sure all the plugins also work in a PWA environment, but they will also give you calls into native APIs on a native device. And again, just to go back to that slide real quick, I always like to say just remind people, it's not our replacement for Cordova. It's simply our alternative PWA focused solution that you can give a look at and see if you want to try it. So getting started with building Ionic. So Darren really did a good job there of showing how simple it is. Once you have our CLI installed, you can have an app running on your device or running on the web in your browser within a few minutes. So getting started, so if you go to ionicframework.com, that's where you can find resources on all of this stuff. If you go to ionicframework.com/getting started, we have a full getting started guide with links to like nodejs.org to make sure you have Node installed. Runs you through using the CLI to make your first app and getting the app running on a device. You can also sign up for an Ionic account. That'll give you access into some of these Ionic Pro services that I alluded to earlier, such as error monitoring, deploy. I definitely recommend you check out those services. And you can dive into our developer docs. So we always strive to have some really good docs that covers everything that you would need to build a good app. It dives into all of our components. You can see live demos right there in the website and see how they would look on an Android and an iOS device. And I think this is where I had hand over. So there for the Zebra developer portal, you can go there if you have any questions. Also, ionicframework.com, you can sign in there and go through all of our docs and see if that can get started that way. All right.
Justin, thanks so much. This was a really great overview, and thank you, Darren, as well. So this is Dan Qualiana again. So I did want to go through a few of the questions that we had, if you have time. So Justin, I'd like to start with you. We had several questions just trying to understand some of the speed of using an Ionic app and the performance of an Ionic app versus a native app, and then also some of the potential limitations that someone might see using Ionic versus native.
Sure. Okay. Awesome questions. So on performance, so I am a performance geek. So back in the day, hybrid apps weren't always the most performant things, especially on older web views and older devices. But the web has come a very, very long way since then. So with any of these, any of these Android devices, also with some of the new native APIs that are available in the browser, such as request animation frame, will change, those kind of APIs, along with browsers just being way better nowadays than they used to be. We do not see any performance issues, even on low-end devices. So especially, personally, I always make sure that we're always testing all of our stuff on the average device that people actually have. So, not everybody has like $800 to drop on a Pixel or, $1,000 to drop on the latest iPhone. And on these basic devices, we still see 60 frames per second all day. We make sure that we take care of all the crazy performance stuff for you. So making sure that you're always writing to the DOM after reading it, so you're not thrashing the DOM, or making sure that we're using wheel change for all of our animations to make sure that they're all hardware accelerated. These are all things that we're taking care of for you. And I recommend you go, grab a basic, affordable Android device, load an Ionic app on it, and I'm pretty sure you'll be pretty amazed at how smooth it actually feels. And what was the other question, Dan?
It was more on limitations of the API versus native.
Sure. So limitations. So with Cordova, if you're, so one of the biggest limitations of anything built on the web traditionally is the web simply just doesn't have all of the APIs yet being the keyword there, that are, available to native apps. So Cordova and Capacitor bridge these gaps and allow you to, access all of this functionality that is not there in the browser yet. But that is something to remember. You may have to use a Cordova plugin for some functionality that may not be available on the web yet. But the modern web is very powerful, especially on Android devices. You have Chrome, and using Chrome, you can get access to Bluetooth if you want to. You can do push notifications, you can do caching, all of this stuff, and it's all built right into the browser. Other limitations, if you're trying to build like the next, next huge like 3D, very intensive game on a mobile device, Ionic might not be your best bet yet. That is fast changing with like WebAssembly and stuff like that coming to the browser. But if you're going, something that is extremely performance intensive and extremely graphics intensive, so like 3D graphics, the web might not be your best bet yet. Although I recommend you try it on your devices and see how it feels to you. Otherwise, there are no big limitations. The biggest thing is just making sure that if you have some functionality that's not available in the browser yet, you are going to need a Cordova plugin to do that. And on the rare chance, the Cordova plugin community is huge, but on the rare chance that there isn't a Cordova plugin for your device yet, you may have to build your own, like Darren did for the Zebra devices. But the Cordova API is pretty awesome. It makes it pretty easy to do that. And with Capacitor, we're trying to make that even easier to do. And hopefully that answers those questions.
Definitely. We actually even heard from some of the attendees that they've had great performance. And I would say that your large active developer network definitely speaks to that. I did want to, just kind of a tie-in with your last statement. I was curious, Darren, on your experience with the Zebra devices and the Cordova library on how complicated that was to build, and for those who are looking to work with the Zebra devices through Ionic and Cordova.
So Dan, sorry, are you asking how complicated it was to write a Cordova plugin in general, or to write like I just demoed in this presentation to create an app for a Zebra device?
Well, I guess for the Cordova plugin for a Zebra device, and for what a general developer would have to do, or is that something that Zebra has already taken care of?
Yeah, so in general, I've tried to provide as much resource as I can. So most people listening would not have to do any kind of native code if they didn't want to. Our Data Wedge API is very feature rich, and it's becoming more feature rich with every release of Data Wedge. To be honest, you can the goal, or I don't know if this is external information actually, but the goal of the Data Wedge API is to do everything that you can currently do with the native API. So more and more, you would not need to do any kind of native development with our devices. But so if you didn't want to, having said that, there are existing resources out there, like I alluded to earlier. I've sort of wrapped our internal developer kit in a Cordova plugin for other customers in the past, and that's available on my GitHub. And if you sort of search around on Google for Cordova plugin Zebra devices, or one of Symbol devices, the old company ancestry, then you'll end up with an awful lot of hits, and hopefully one of those will be available to you without having to start writing something from scratch.
Okay, yeah, and we did get a couple questions just on if there's an existing Ionic app trying to make it run on a Zebra device. Do you feel that your answer addressed that, or are there any other things that we'd want to tell someone who wants to run their application on a Zebra device?
So right now, the advice would be to, you've got your existing Zebra device, and then you would incorporate the intent plugin like I showed in this presentation, and you would use the Data Wedge intent output functionality to receive those scans within your application. That would be the advice. So yeah, it would be possible to incorporate with an existing app.
Okay. And I did want to, we had a few questions just around Data Wedge support on devices. So Data Wedge is a Zebra only tool, so it only works on Zebra devices. So it's not going to be a solution for iOS. I did in the questions send a link to a matrix that shows the Zebra devices that are supported. If you don't see that link or want to find it, you can go to developer.zebra.com and just search for a matrix, and you'll be able to find that. I also wanted to point out with the scanners, these are it's a hardware-based scanner, so it is not using the camera of the device, but it's a laser or imager that is capturing the barcode. So this is not just a software-based type of scanner. And we did have a question, Darren, around how that scanner works. Is it, and how Data Wedge works, is it actually capturing the scanned information in entering that data, or is it just kind of recreating it and entering it, like typing it really fast?
So something needs to register with the scanner driver that I want to scan something. So in this example I was showing here, that was data wedge, and it was registering with the scanner driver and the when you actually press the hardware trigger. And yeah, I apologize if that was a little bit confusing in my first video where I was using the camera. I wanted to show something more visual on the demo without having to sort of struggle with a webcam. But typically, yes, our devices, you would use the hardware laser imager on the front of the device. If you're using the keyboard output of data wedge, then yeah, it's just like typing really fast. It's not exactly the same. It's using key events rather than the full key up, key down events. But essentially, yeah, if you're trying to go into a text box in a view in your application, or in a web page, just into a text field, if that's got focus and you scan a barcode, then it's just like typing really fast on the keyboard. But what I was demonstrating in this call was the intent output. So that's not using the keyboard. That is like you get the scan data, or data wedge gets the scan data from the driver. It packages it up into an intent, and it sends the intent to your application or wherever you've configured it to send it to in the data wedge profile. So there's two different ways of configuring data wedge output, and you can actually use both at the same time if you wanted to, although I struggle to think of a use case to do that.
Okay, thanks, Darren. So we also had a few questions. We focused on barcode scanning. There were some questions around RFID, and do we have today any sample code showing how to use an RFID reader to pull in data through Ionic?
Not to my knowledge. I would advise there is an SDK for a native SDK for those hardware readers in Android, and at that point you would be building the Cordova plugin yourself, or sort of engaging with Zebra with professional services or something along those lines. But unless Dan or Justin, you know of anything out in the field at the moment.
I am not aware of that at the moment, but it is possible.
So that's something, depending on the amount of interest, that we could explore building out a sample application. But as Justin and Darren said, Zebra does not, and Ionic does not have any examples today. So let's see. There's a few questions also just on how to get started working with Zebra. So we have some information here. Our developer portal has some really great getting started information. You can get the news, and you can join the ISV program. So the ISV program is more for a partnership at the business level. So that's going to help connect you with sales, marketing, and technical resources. That can be a really good help for a small, mid-size, or large business. And some of the benefits to that program are you are able to get access to some free demo devices. So I think access to the devices is generally one of the big first steps, because, as Darren said, there are emulators, but it's very tricky if you're trying to replicate the actual performance of a scanner to do that without the device. So, one method would be to join the program, where we can then provide a demo unit. But if that is not the path forward for you, there are Zebra resellers and distributors out there that you can buy units from, trying to find a device and just kind of building it out. But I do think our developer portal has some really great getting started guides, and Darren's right up here is a really great place to start. All right, we have a lot of questions coming in, so I'm going to try to look through these and see where we should go next.
Hey, sorry if someone asked me a question. I had lost connection there for a second.
No, we're still good, Justin. I'm trying to read through. We got a whole host of questions in here.
Gotcha. Awesome.
Here's one. Darren, are there APIs to create a default data wedge profile?
Yes. So I talked about the different versions of data wedge. So there is a data wedge API available from version 6.4, I think, and up. And if you look at the code for the sample app that I demonstrated at the start of the call, that creates the profile when the application starts up. So that's a good example of how to do it. It is also possible to create this profile from a native application using the EMDK APIs on both Android and Xamarin. And that is using the data capture profile. If you look at the documentation for that, then that will lead you in the right direction. But I suspect from the context of this call, the question is more around the data wedge API to do that.
All right, and Justin, a question for you. They're looking for an explanation on how to use the native web intent with Ionic app. So how would they activate a button with a native plugin and subscribe to events with it?
So activating a button with a native plugin. So usually with these native plugins, as the Zebra plugin does, it's going to be passing data back to the web view. And the web view is actually what handles like activating a button or showing some kind of UI or something like that. So because we are built with Angular at the moment, most of the Ionic native plugins, you interact with them through something called observables. If you're an Angular developer, you probably already know about observables. But basically, observables are these. You can think of them as fancy events. So if a plugin sends back a native intent event or any kind of data, the observable will be fired, and then you can decide what to do based off of based off of the data that you just got back from and
Oh, Justin, you're kind of breaking up.
Oh, I'm sorry, my connection is a little. So just to be very brief, basically you can
Sorry, Justin, but it seems like we lost you a little bit there. So let's see, we'll move on to another question since Justin was breaking up there. And Darren, I'm not sure if you can address this one, but hopefully between you and Justin. So we did get some questions around using some other Zebra accessories, so a Bluetooth connected scanner or even a Bluetooth connected printer through Ionic. And Darren, do you have kind of any kind of ideas on how to recommend getting started for someone that was looking to use either of those types of products?
Did they happen to give the model number for the Bluetooth connected print scanners, Dan?
They did not, no.
Okay, yeah, so Zebra, I'll just, you said scanners and printers,
Well,
didn't you?
So Darren, let's assume on the scanner side a CS4070, which is one that can work with either Android or iOS devices.
Okay. Okay, so with that scanner, essentially you are back at writing a native plugin for yourself. I believe the scanner is able to be configured in HID mode or serial port profile. I don't know if plugins exist at the moment to handle serial port profile from the scanner. I know it's quite simple to do because I've done it with another project that I was working on once, just you open up a serial connection with the scanner. If it's in HID mode, then you're just injecting keystrokes onto the page. And at that point, you could probably use the key up and key down events in the DOM, in the page DOM of your Ionic application to process the data coming in from the scanner. So it really depends how you've configured the connection to the scanner, but that's unless there's any additional information from Justin on that.
I think we lost Justin on the audio side. I would like to just kind of add in here, this is our first joint webinar and promotion with Ionic, and as part of this, we are looking to gauge the level of interest and the type of interaction between Zebra and Ionic. by the developer community. So, please reach out to us and let us know. We've already heard some requests for RFID and some requests for Bluetooth scanners and printers. But if you can give us a little more information, either reach out to, post something on our developer portals, or, reply to some of the emails that we have out here. That helps us understand where the need is, and we can look at building out some code and some presentations there.
Yeah, because that's how this call came about, wasn't it, Dan? We saw there was a need in the field, so we went ahead and did some work, and now we have something to offer, so we can continue that moving forward.
Absolutely. So this was our first step working, showcasing the data wedge here, and we were definitely excited about the interest and looking forward to continue that on. So we are nearing the top of the hour, so I think it's probably a good time to wrap things up here. So I did want to give a big thank you to Andrew and to Justin for leading the session and this great partnership we have with Ionic, and also to Darren for his section of the presentation. And with that, I think we can close things out, and we look forward to talking to everyone at our next webinar. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you very much, everybody.